In 1630, Puritans sailed to New England to flee religious persecution in England. Although it was illegal at the time to settle in New England without permission from the king, the Puritans found a legal loophole that they used to their advantage. The Puritans owned the Massachusetts Bay Company, which was given a charter by Charles I to engage in trade in the New World colonies. The charter was issued, it failed to say that the governor and officers of the company were required to stay in England. The Puritans used this submission to move the company and its members to New England to establish a religious community they called the Holy Commonwealth, which was known as the Massachusetts Bay Colony. In April of 1630, the Puritans, led by John Winthrop, led their homes in Boston, England, and sailed from Southampton towards the New World. Boston was originally settled upon the hilly Shawmut Peninsula. It was connected with the mainland Roxbury to the south by a narrow neck of land along the line of present-day Washington Street. The Charles River flowed through the Back Bay to Boston Harbor and separated the peninsula from the mainland to the north and to the west. The center of the colonial town was at the present Old State House. The original center and the colonial South End have long been given over to offices and retail stores. The Old State House is one building that survives. Some other colonial buildings that have survived are the Paul Revere House and Christ Church. Anne Hutchinson was one of the colonists of the Massachusetts colony, but her feminist ideals and her religious beliefs led to her banishment from Boston, causing her to flee to the Rhode Island colony. Hospice Attucks was the first to fall during the Boston Massacre and is acknowledged as the first casualty of the American Revolution. Paul Revere was a patriot and political activist, well known for his roles in the Boston Massacre and Boston Tea Party. Literacy rates were high. Massachusetts law required a tax-supported school for every community that could boast 50 or more families. Puritans wanted their children to be able to read the Bible. The Massachusetts Bay Colony was a man's world. Women did not participate in town meetings and were excluded from making decisions in the church. Women were considered inferior to men. They were considered to be weak and were expected to be obedient to their husbands in all respects. In most colonies, women could not vote, preach, hold office, go to school or college, make contracts or sue, or own property. In almost every instance, the wife was considered to be subordinate to the husband, whose authority was absolute over her. John Winthrop had written that a true wife could only find contentment in subjection to her husband's authority. Husbands did not often discuss business affairs with their wives, and often treated wives as servants. In 1636, Harvard College was founded. It is the first and oldest institute of higher learning in the United States. The college is named for John Harvard, who died in 1638 and left his library and half of his estate to the new school. The Pequot War was an armed conflict between the Pequot tribe and the alliance of the English colonists of Massachusetts Bay. The Pequots lost the war. At the end, hundreds had been killed, and hundreds of prisoners were sold into slavery to the West Indies. King Philip's War began when a band of Wampanoag warriors raided the border settlement of Swansea, Massachusetts, and massacred the English colonists. After increasing hostility with the Native Americans, the English met with King Philip, chief of the Wampanoag, and demanded that his forces surrender their arms. The Wampanoags did so, but in 1675, a Christian Native American who had been acting as an informer to the English was murdered, and 3 Wampanoag were tried and executed for crime. All the other New England colonies soon joined when scores of colonists were massacred by the Wampanoags. The Narragansett village was destroyed by the English and brought them on the side of King Philip. Narragansett were defeated, and their chief was killed, while the Wampanoag and their other allies were gradually subdued. King Philip's wife and son were captured and sold into slavery. Philip was assassinated by a Native American in the service of the English. Massachusetts was the first slave-holding colony in New England. The first mention of slavery is after the Bloody Pequot War in 1637. The women and children were enslaved in New England. Men and boys were deemed too dangerous to keep in the colony. They were transported to the West Indies to be exchanged for African slaves. Boston merchants made New England's first attempt at direct import of slaves from West Africa to the West Indies in 1644. The venture was partially successful. It was premature because the big chartered companies still held monopoly on the Gold Coast and Guinea. By 1676, however, Boston ships had pioneered a slave trade to Madagascar, and they were selling black human beings to Virginians by 1678. For the home market, the Puritans generally took the Africans to the West Indies and sold them in exchange for a few experienced slaves, which they brought back to New England. Boston had the largest slave population. Slaves in Boston were forbidden to buy provisions in a market, carry a stick or a cane, keep hogs or swine, or stroll about the streets, lanes, or common at night, or all out on Sunday. Punishments for these violations of laws ranged up to 20 lashes depending on aggravating factors. Black slaves were singled out for punishment by whipping if they broke street lamps under a law of 1753, and a special law allowed severe whippings for any black person who hit a white person. The Boston Massacre was a street fight that occurred on March 5, 1770, between a patriot mob throwing snowballs, stones, and sticks at a squad of British soldiers. Several colonists were killed, and this led to a campaign by speechwriters to rouse the ire of citizenry. On the night of December 16, 1773, Samuel Adams and the Sons of Liberty boarded 3 ships in the Boston harbor and threw 342 chests of tea overboard. This act of American colonial defiance served as a protest against taxation.